Well, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Natalie Ashdown from the Open Door Coaching Group and welcome to our Mental Health Awareness Week for 2020. It's an absolute pleasure to bring you this presentation today by Andy Gild. Welcome, Andy. It's great to see you there. And just
Thank you.
before we begin, I'd like to just do the acknowledgement of our traditional owners and acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which we meet today, acknowledge their elders past, present and future, and anyone on the line who might be from an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent. So today our topic is Neurozone, a holistic approach to health and well-being and building a strong foundation to support optimal brain performance. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to Andy Gild from Synergy Global. Andy is an experienced physiotherapist and health and well-being coach with Synergy Global. She focuses on optimizing individual and team performance through knowledge gained in working in road trauma, ICU, cardiac care, transplantation, community health, women's health, private practice, and personal training. She also has a not-for-profit organisation. She's the co-founder and CEO of Bicycles for Humanity in Melbourne, and she brings strategic governance and development. But today, Andy is going to share with us all about the Neurozone and how this a holistic approach to health and well-being can help us all. So thanks, Andy. We'll hand it over to you. I'll go on mute now and turn my video off, and I look forward to hearing and learning from you in our presentation this morning.
Thank you, Natalie. It's a pleasure to be here with you during this very important Mental Health Awareness Week. Probably at no better time right now than what we're all experiencing with the increased demand in mental health services. And I just heard this morning, I think that it's something like 15% increased demand in Australia, and here where I'm based in Victoria, in Melbourne, it's up 30%. So these are really worrying numbers. And so these kind of awareness programs are so important. So thank you. I'm really excited to be sharing a little bit from a body of work called Neurozone, which really brings together the learnings from psychology, from neurology, and from immunology. And essentially, the way that the model works is that there's an online assessment, and then a report is generated that is backed up by great detail or a great amount of data analytics and also neuroscientific research. And what comes out of the report is that it identifies particular behaviours that help lead us to optimal brain performance. It's a really extensive body of work from a guy called Etienne van der Walt, who is a neurologist and cognitive scientist, he calls himself, out of Cape Town in South Africa, which coincidentally is where I spent quite a few years of my formative childhood years. And so I've got an extra synergy there. So yeah, as you said, Natalie, I come from a background of physio and made my way into health coaching. I think really when I learned to understand that the mindset of my clients so much determined the outcome in their rehab or their improvement. And this Neurozone really talks to that around focusing on our entire brain and body system in order to thrive. So yeah, I'm very excited to share a little bit of this. So as we know, this COVID pandemic has brought an unprecedented number of stresses that we're all experiencing to some degree. So what I'm going to talk about today is how those stresses impact our mental health. And looking at the Neurozone model, it's obviously a big body of work, but we're just going to focus on two areas. One is that we all have a finite amount of energy, and the other is around an idea of a relaxed physiological state, which I'll talk more about, and how that leads to improved performance. And then we'll focus a little bit on the specific behaviors that have been identified, particularly during COVID-19, that help improve our chances and our abilities of coping. Excuse me. So this Neurozone work we're going to be focusing on individuals, but it's actually very relevant for teams and organizations as well. So if people are interested, we can chat more about that later. So we all understand that we have, I think we can all appreciate that we've all experienced some degree of an increased stress response over the last few months. And essentially, this is because our brain is constantly, both subconsciously and consciously, looking out for rewards and threats in our environment. And we also know that we're hardwired for connection. And particularly for those of us in Melbourne, we are still very much confronted with this lack of connection and uncertainty of when we're going to have that back again. So basically what our brains are saying is that I'm not sure how I can navigate this unfamiliar territory. You know, I'm not used to being at home all the time. I'm not used to going to the supermarket and seeing separations and X's on the floor. I'm not used to having people's faces covered by masks. And so I can't connect, and I don't know what's going on. So our brains, with all that information, basically say, okay, well, I better turn on my stress response because I might need to react. So I'll just turn it on just in case. So this has led to what some people have been calling COVID brain fog. And even if you haven't heard the terminology, I'm sure that many of you can actually identify with some of the symptoms that people have been speaking about. Probably the most common is sort of a lack of clarity and fuzziness in the brain, forgetfulness, not able to concentrate or focus very well. And this can affect decisions both in the workplace around productivity. What shall I focus on first, and also in the home. Which bottle of wine should we drink? Is it going to be red or white? It's these important things. And I know myself, I've had quite a few vegetables that have been burnt over this time that probably wouldn't used to have ended up looking the way they look. So I think we all can come up with our own ideas around how we feel in that regard. The other thing that a lot of people have been complaining about is just feeling flat and lack of motivation and just real lethargy. And a lot of people I've been speaking to are just really tired, which I think is strange because we're not doing as much. And then also, obviously, there's been different levels, fluctuations of anxiety and depression as well. So what is going on? We know that we have a cocktail of chemicals, seen in my cocktail glass here, that are running through our brain that affect both the way we function and the way we feel. And we also know, and you can see in the diagram here, that our brain cells connect one cell to another cell here through the release of neurochemicals. And so these neurochemicals very much affect how our brains are working. I think I've got a bit of COVID brain fog going on. Apologies. So what I'm going to talk about today are two of these hormones that are related to this COVID brain fog, if I can manage that. So Essentially, our understanding of our brains is still pretty rudimentary, but we do know that our brains are constantly scanning for both threats and for dangers in order to keep us alive, to survive, and then to thrive. And we also know that our brains will assign a value to all the bits of incoming information, incoming cues, dependent upon how important those cues are for our survival. And if I think about when I go for a run, and I might be very consciously looking out for potholes on the floor, making sure I don't trip. That is what my brain is focusing on. And it's relatively small threat. However, if I turn a corner, and even though I'm sort of looking at my footing, if I see a car coming around the corner, then I'm going to focus majorly on the car. And who cares what's under my feet? I'm just doing what I have to do. So that's very much how our brains will automatically, unless we stop and focus and pay more attention, it automatically will focus on those things for our survival. And in the Neurozone speak, that's called value tagging. And in recent months, our brain has been focusing on so much of these perceived threats that we see in our environment, and that's what's leading to this increased stress response. And so we know that the stress response brings in, another cocktail glass, cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And when cortisol hits our brains, we know that it tends to primarily focus on the area, the amygdala, which is part of our emotional brain. And because more energy is focused on the amygdala, less energy is able to be directed to our prefrontal cortex, which sits right behind our forehead. And we know that this part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, is responsible for helping us decide whether a threat is a real threat or whether it's a perceived threat. And it's also the same part of our brain that helps us with problem solving. So it makes sense then that when we're under threat and more attention is going to the amygdala, less to the prefrontal cortex, that we're going to be suffering these symptoms of decreased clarity, focus, and decision-making, which also leads to memory issues and learning problems as well. So that's the first neurochemical, cortisol, that I wanted to mention. The other one that is related more to our motivation and our energy levels is dopamine. And dopamine is also very much connected to our value tagging system. So what we do know is that dopamine helps drive our behaviors towards our more pleasurable goals. And the way, part of what we know so far about what happens is that a complex amount of information is stored in our brains all the time, when we see something, when we learn something new. I just happen to have a delicious red apple sitting on my desk, and I might use that to explain how the dopamine is rewarded when we move towards a goal. So if you imagine the very first time that you're faced, or you come across an apple, and you might really like, it looks shiny, it's got a nice weight to it, might smell good. And so dopamine is released, it's something pleasurable. Then you might take a bite and it's all delicious and juicy, more dopamine is released. And then, because the apple's actually sustaining my energy from a physical sense, then more dopamine's released. So the next time I might see an apple, I might release dopamine even before I have that bite, because I know what's coming. So that will release the dopamine and give me some energy towards reaching for it. And then the following time, I might just have to think about the apple and dopamine is released. And so that's the way our brain will keep a record, basically, of our pleasurable goals. And because it's releasing dopamine, it's related to what is called a motivational energy booster. The other thing that we also know from studies over the last few years is that dopamine is also involved when we avoid threats. And the important distinction here is that when our behaviors move us towards rewards, we have this dopamine hit. However, when our behaviors are responding to threats, then those behaviors are really facilitated by the release of dopamine so that we can then prepare ourselves for our fight-flight response in case we need it. So our behaviors that move us away from threats are seen as motivational energy depleters. And the relevance for this during COVID-19 is that we have an increased perception of threats. There's so much negative news around, and it's not only just COVID, there's a lot going on in the world, politics, environmental, the list goes on. And even when you're, out with other people who are espousing or just wanting to talk about all this negativity, it all sort of adds on to our perceived threats. And so we are unconsciously, mostly, trying to move away from these threats, and therefore releasing more dopamine and wasting energy, in fact. So the question then comes to, what can we do to overturn what is a genetically embedded response that actually depletes our dopamine in order to actually be resilient and cope? And we are very fortunate in that, as we know, our brains are neuroplastic. They literally can change. And some of the important ideas behind Neurozone, the first one of them is around the importance of mindfulness and the fact that if we work to interpret things differently, perceive things differently, then that plays a big role. And the other thing which we're focusing more on today is around the behaviors. If we can adopt more behaviors that are feeding into our dopamine reward system, that will lead us to optimal functioning. Excuse me. And the beauty of the Neurozone itself, the reports, is that it actually directs us to which behaviors we can work on to increase our resilience. So I hope all that's making sense so far. So I thought I'll just share today a couple of key ideas from the Neurozone model in order to get a better understanding of how the idea of resilience underpins our mental well-being. The first important thing, probably the most important thing to understand, is that we all have a finite amount of energy. And that energy is literally built by the food we eat and by the oxygen we breathe, and the chemical reactions happen. And then we have energy resources that we can then contribute to our behaviors that lead us to staying alive initially, surviving, and then thriving. And the report itself, don't worry too much. This is sort of one of the aspects of what it looks like, but I just wanted to show you how the system is based in an extensive amount of data, which combines 65 of our behaviors. And these are divided into three main sections. The first section here in the green is related to what they call foundational drivers or wellness drivers. And those are things like exercise, nutrition, our sleep-wake cycle, and silencing the mind, which is related to mindfulness. The other section here is around our social safety, our goal directedness, which is what we're going to be focusing more on here because it's very closely associated with our dopamine, and collective creativity. So the collective creativity is around how we associate with other people. The social safety is around connecting, bonding, and meaningful contribution. And these all contribute to what are called our emotional drivers. So we've got the foundational, we've got the emotional, and then over here in the orange are more the what they call higher order drivers, which are executive functioning and learning. And so the report gives us an idea of where each individual sits within the whole scheme of all those different behaviors. The second key idea that I'd love you to take away is that in order for us to build resilience, we need to constantly work towards what's called a relaxed physiological state. And this means every single day we need to perform behaviors that support us. And so when we're in a relaxed state, a sort of a homeostatic state, and then we face a challenge, the idea is that we can expend the appropriate amount of energy to overcome that challenge, and then as quickly as possible, drop down to that baseline relaxed physiological state so that we then are ready to ready for our next challenge, which we know will come. So if you look at when our bodies are in the green section, when we're in this relaxed physiological state, then not only do are we optimizing our health and preventing disease, we're also setting ourselves up the best opportunity to help build our skills and competencies. Compared to if we're sitting more in this red space, in the chronic stress space, then we're much more prone to illness and to burnout. So what does this mean then in terms of our behaviors? Essentially, what we want to do is avoid behaviors that deplete our dopamine rewards and our energy, and increase behaviors that support this relaxed physiological state, which then decreases our chronic stress and also gives us the ability to spend more energy on those higher order drivers. And even better still, when we can create habits from these behaviors, then even less energy is needed to carry out those behaviors, because we know that our brains just follow the easiest path of less resistance to conserve as much energy as possible for ourselves to survive and thrive. So the Neurozone system captures so much data that then it's able to predict which of these behaviors give each individual the best opportunity to work towards this relaxed physiological state and increasing resilience. It's important to note that the Neurozone report is a snapshot in time, and just as we continually change and our ecosystem continually changes, so therefore do the predictors of what resilient behaviors will change depending on the context that we're in. And even so, there's still value in extrapolating what some of these behaviors, how these behaviors might be useful to support a general population. This pandemic that we're in is a great example because it's showed the differences and the similarities across the world. If I think of the different resilient behaviors that are needed from a woman I was speaking to the other day, who's a pilot, who's stranded in Europe away from her family. She's living in a small hotel room, and she just has the uncertainty of not knowing when she's going to be coming back home. If I think about what behaviors would support her more compared to one of my clients here in Melbourne who's working from home, up to this week was homeschooling her kids and really still sitting with this uncertainty about next stages of freedom, then, you know, they will have different predictors of resilience. Let's have a look here at this graph, which shows across the world, this is data from mostly South Africa, but also from the US, Europe, and also here in Australia. It shows over the last 6 months or so, the top 10 most significant predictors of resilience. And interestingly, but not surprisingly, exercise has been an important and constant feature throughout the time. What's not shown here, but I find is also really interesting, is that not only is the duration of exercise been found to be important, but also the diversity. So mixing up the type of exercises that we do has been shown to be a really important factor. Looking here at the social safety, which, remember, that's about connecting and bonding and meaningful contribution, that's also been a main predictor here. And so that means that if somebody is working towards these connecting activities, then that's supporting their resilience. Interesting though, it's in August, it wasn't a main feature. It wasn't one of the top 10. What I want to really highlight here is this goal directedness, which, as I mentioned, is related to our dopamine reward system. And you can see that that is just gradually going up and up and up. If we have a closer look at that goal directedness area, we can see that it's been divided into energy depleters and energy boosters. And so these are showing, of all these behaviors, which have had the most impact on resilience during COVID-19. So what's interesting is if you look at the light blue, the distractive habit avoidance, that actually wasn't even registering pre-COVID times, but gradually increased and has stayed high as an important predictor. The reducing negative thought patterns has always been a strong predictor of resilience. So those are both in the energy depleters. When we look at the energy boosters, we can see that enthusiasm was very high, but seems to have dropped off over the last few months. Optimism has been an important predictor and stayed pretty high. The interesting ones have been the bottom three. You see here gratitude jumped up in the early part of this COVID pandemic and has been sustained. And perhaps even more interesting is that humor and curiosity have really come up in the last few months as a big predictor. So if we have a look at both the overall predictors here, we see exercise and connection are very important. And then when we dive into that goal-directed behavior, we can see that both increasing these sort of behaviors of enthusiasm, optimism, gratitude, humor, curiosity are important, and reducing destructive habit avoidance and negative thought patterns. So I find that interesting. Hope you do too. Not specifically tailored to this goal directedness, but I thought interesting just to share here that there's also been an interesting change with our social safety drivers. And when you look at the social safety, it's about connecting to others and feeling supported. And what you can see that in the early part, March, April, there was a huge drop in belonging in work life and identity in work life. And that could be due to the huge disruption that we had, uncertainty around our work situation, going virtual. And then you can see that this identity in work life is coming back up a bit. So perhaps we're settling in a little bit more. The trust in work life really went up quite high, dropped off a bit last month or the last few months, but went up initially, which talks to the need for feeling belonging and having that trusted connection. And then the identity and personal lives also jumped up at the beginning, perhaps also as we took time to reflect on what's important. We all kind of stopped and thought, okay, what do we do now? And I think there's been a lot that we've gained from that downtime as well, and just thinking about those sort of things. I was actually on a walk this morning with my sister-in-law, and we were just talking about what sort of things will stick. How long will we appreciate, the small things? We were really looking at a lawn being mowed, and from this high to like knee high, it was just, we were appreciating the gardeners, and with the kids going back to school, there was laughing in the playground, and just really appreciating those small things. So long may they last, I say. So yeah, we've all been trying to take care of ourselves and increase our resilient behaviours over this COVID period. And it would be interesting if you think about what you've been doing, your family, perhaps clients or colleagues, to increase your own resilience. And then if you think about what we've spoken about, whether they align or not with the Neurozone research. Before I saw that research, because that's only come out in the last month or so, and probably because I've been kind of living with this Neurozone ideology, if you like, for a couple of years now, it's the sort of the things that I've been doing. One of them, as far as the depleting behaviors, of avoiding depleting energy behaviors, is trying to cut back from the news. Initially, watching every day, what are the numbers, what's going on, but really trying to cut back and cutting back from some of the social media. I've also been mixing up my exercise. I've been making sure I keep running, walking with friends and family to increase that connection as much as possible. Add a little bit of yoga in just for to mix it up. And I've also had a lot of fun outside my house with this little fork village. You've probably seen lots of these similar things, a lot of spoonvilles around the place. But to the dismay of my 20-year-old children, when I started this, it's actually been a lot of fun. So we've been really bringing a lot of joy into not only our family. My daughter created this little stick guy, a fork fella here, and then made a wanted sign. And then a friend of mine put him in jail, and we had a lot of fun. There's a policeman now. My mum created during the Tour de France a fork cyclist. So everybody and people walking past have been able to contribute. So it's just doing things that bring joy. The other thing that I've been doing is a lovely meditation by a guy called Vishen Lakhiani, 6-phase meditation, he calls it. And the reason I like it is because it talks to compassion, forgiveness, and gratitude, which have been some key words that I've held on to over this time. So to me, this very much aligns with the research around the behaviors that boost our resilience. So perhaps you can relate to some of those. So then what does this mean? What coaching implications? What does it mean for our teams or even ourselves? And I think the key thing here is that when we appreciate that our bodies are complex systems and that everything affects everything, then we do need to work on many things at once to support the whole. And it does take time, you just slowly, as we know, habit creation takes time, and you start with one small thing and gradually build it in. If I can give a couple of examples from a couple of my coaching clients, I had recently, I was working with a woman who was struggling with emotional eating, and another one who procrastination was her big problem. And when we sort of tapped in a bit more, it was obvious that they both weren't sleeping well. They felt this disconnection, and they had lots and lots of this negative thoughts going through their mind. And this is so common with so many people that I've been speaking with. And so the Neurozone report will actually give some idea of which behaviors will support not only the foundational rhythms or wellness rhythms. And so both of them added an exercise program, a daily walking program into their worlds. Then we had a look at what behaviors they were doing that both boosted and depleted their energy levels. And they both found that a gratitude practice, a little bit of mindfulness, just to help with that negative thought pattern was really, really useful. And interestingly, the client who had procrastination issues decided that she would add in one thing that gave her joy every single day. So this is not sort of an obvious thing that you would expect somebody with procrastination issues that would help. But actually, by putting all this together, they both found that they had increased energy levels that were then able to support them first setting smaller goals and then sort of working towards their larger, more important goals. So the Neurozone body of work really gives this neuroscientific understanding behind the importance of incorporating these behaviors that support not only our foundational but also our emotional drivers in order to optimize our brain function. And specifically during COVID, we've seen that exercise, mindfulness, gratitude, humor, curiosity are so important, and of course connection for our overall well-being and to increase our resilience and for good mental health. I hope you found this interesting and useful. And perhaps that with this neuroplastic mind of ours in mind, that you've had some learnings that around how we understand, or how a bigger understanding of how our increased stress levels can affect our mental health for a start. The idea around this idea that we've got a finite amount of energy, and that conserving our energy and working on this relaxed physiological state helps to decrease our anxiety, decrease our stress response, and those symptoms of chronic brain fog, so that we can think more clearly, problem solve better, and hopefully have more energy. And I guess, hopefully a takeaway is that there's still plenty to do despite all our restrictions. There are lots of behaviors that we can focus on that we can help, boost our resilience to deal with this kind of new normal. And I guess for any other challenges that come our way in the future, which we know they will. So yes, thank you for listening and spending a few minutes with me. If you have any questions, happy for you to reach out, to contact me. And we do have a special offer during this Mental Health Awareness Week that if anyone's interested, feel free to take up. So I think that's my sharing, Natalie.
Thank you so much, Andy. I really enjoyed listening to you. And I think when I was reflecting the thing that resonated most with me was around how am I boosting my energy levels and what am I allowing to deplete my energy levels? And I think your reminders around mindfulness and doing those activities that bring us joy. When you said what brings me joy, I actually wrote that down and I thought that's a great coaching question that we can continue to ask. Not only because of the times we're in now, but also it's a great question we can ask to really boost our mental health as well, to be focusing on that. So on behalf of everyone here at Open Door and everyone who's been listening, we'd really like to thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And also thank you for sharing the information around Neurozone. And it's so important to have an evidence-based tool that we can use if we need it. And I'm sure people will reach out to you if they'd like to find out more information. So thank you. And if
Thank you,
anyone
Natalie.
would like to, you're welcome. And if anyone would like to find out more about Mental Health Awareness Week, the other programs and other workshops that we have available, the other seminars and webinars we have available, please just jump onto our website at opendoorcoaching.com.au. And as many of you may be aware, we actually do offer mental health first aid training, and you can go to our website at opendoorcoaching.com.au and find out more about mental health first aid training. The training really complements the work we do as coaches, and we've trained lots of people now in being able to have those very important conversations around mental health. So once again, thank you so much, Andy. Thank you everyone for tuning in today to our webinar, and I look forward to catching up with you with the other Mental Health Awareness Week presentations that we have available. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
We'll say goodbye for now. Thanks, Andy. Bye for now.